1. I'm a petite 19-year-old female. This happened earlier this year when I was 18 and trying to make more friends. I had just gotten out of a traumatic relationship and was trying to find myself. I also had the worst bout of anxiety I've ever had in my life. Through January to September. I think these circumstances made me a little vulnerable and way too tolerant of weirdness in exchange for someone to connect with. I frequent a gas station 5 miles from my house. I'm familiar with mostly everyone there, at least with their faces, so that's why I was surprised to see someone new working at the register. A scrawny boy around my age. We never talked besides the usual "Hi, how are you? Here's your change." I only saw him a few times. That may also be why I didn't recognize him right away when he added me on Facebook. I don't think there's anything harmful in that in itself. A simple Facebook ad. Later on, I found out he asked around for my name to look me up online. Apparently, he got it from someone who used to be an asshole to me in high school, and whom I have blocked on Facebook. I wonder how that convo went, but I found all of this out later. We began casually talking, and we bonded on some things like video games or anime. It was cool to meet a fellow nerd in the midst of my small rural town, so we made plans to hang out after a few weeks, and I told him where I lived. What follows is why I will never give my address out to anyone ever again without talking to them and vetting them for months. Just a little after I gave him my address, I cancelled our plans because he started to get flirty. I wasn't ready for that, nowhere near it, so I thought, oh well, shit happens, might as well leave him be. I didn't have any plans to hang out with him in the future, but that turned into him bargaining with me when to come over, each time being met with a no. That turned into him sending me pictures of him on his way, like the road to my house through his car windshield, even after being told no. But I'm just joking around. He would say things like, "I'm coming to pick you up right now, no escape, you can't bail on me." I'm pretty sure someone has to agree to plans before bailing. Each one of these was met with, "Please do not come to my house." In retrospect, I should have blocked him there. One night he asked me on Facebook what donuts I liked. Before I ever figured out what he was doing, he was practically at my house. I went outside where he sat on the hood of his car with donuts. I saw he was nervous and seemed apologetic. And me being the way I was, I sympathized and didn't tell him to get the fuck out of my driveway. Everything weird about him, I chalked it up to him just being an inexperienced kid who probably read some dumb shit on the internet on how to interact with women. Certain subreddit. Where the red flags were supposed to be in my head, there was instead a triumphant, I didn't have a panic attack from hanging out with someone. So I continued to put up with the pushiness and red flags. He seemed young and naive enough, so I didn't feel any fear. I felt like I had control of it. We'd only hang out in my driveway for a few hours, him showing me CDs or comedy videos in his car, and me slowly growing more confidence with myself. Something was obviously wrong, though. I didn't tell any of my other friends because I knew they would point it out. I just wanted the few hours I felt myself making progress with my anxiety levels around people. I was stupid, and have since learned my lesson. Then one night he got physical, but it wasn't like you would think. He was playing around, but in no shape or form was he gentle. He'd full on smack me in my arm, punch my leg hard enough that I found bruises the next day, pretend to choke me, but I actually felt my pulse in my head. Each time I'd voice my concern, but it came to the point I couldn't speak without him hurting me or sticking his hand in my face. He was laughing. I was nervously laughing and uncomfortable. And it got through to me that something was wrong with this dude. A few nights later he messaged me. He would occasionally say edgy things that seemed in a joking manner, but this time he said he was a sadist. Then it kind of all connected, the hitting, the pushiness, the lack of empathy towards me, besides bringing food over or random gifts he'd pick up at Walmart. I never asked for any of those, and he kept a tally of the money he was apparently spending on me, saying he spent over $200 on me and planned to cash it in soon. When I asked what he meant, he wouldn't explain, only, "You'll see." I never asked him for a thing. He'd just show up with stuff. The second to last time I hung out with him in my driveway. I walked back in to complain about him to my grandma. I think I was finally getting tired of him and waking up to the reality of the situation. I couldn't let this unhealthy situation keep going. I was carrying on with unhealthy boundaries and a lack of backbone from my last relationship. I needed to end it. That night, though, while we were outside talking, my grandma had turned on the light in my room. He noticed and asked if it was my room. I said yes without thinking. You can hear someone talking in that end of the house through the air conditioner in my room if you stood outside. It's possible he stood outside my window in the darkness for however long and listened to my conversation with my grandma in my room. I think this is why the next thing happened. After that, I didn't hear from him for a few weeks and felt relieved. I let my guard down, and then I heard from him, wanting to hang out. I agreed because it would be the last time. I had my mind set, and I wanted to end it nicely, feeling that I owed him for allowing it to go on this long. If anything weird transpired, I'd ask him to leave, and that would be the end of it. We sat on his car talking about mundane things, when I mentioned I wanted to mow the grass soon, to which he answered, "No, you're not." I didn't understand. I asked him to explain, and he went on to tell me that I had absolutely no conviction for anything, that I was lazy, that all I did was sit in my room and do nothing. Not true, I worked and went to school. That I couldn't accomplish anything, etc. Just a barrage of horrible shit that shocked me. He said he knew me better than I knew myself. We only hung out about a total of 5 times. I didn't have any words, so I let the conversation die and eventually went inside. That was the last time we ever saw each other because he didn't contact me ever again, and I didn't have to tell him not to. I think he knew what he was doing. This doesn't include the time I told him I was sick and had to argue with him to turn around in my driveway to go home and leave me alone. I've since established healthier boundaries. I'm learning to get myself out of situations. My anxiety is a world's length better, and I've made better friends. So dude who I hung out with in my driveway, let's not meet again. 2. I don't even know where to start with this story. I was kind of young at the time, around 7 or 8, but old enough to know what was going on. I lived in a pretty decent neighborhood, but my family was in the process of moving. There was a large mixture of families with children and retired seniors living on my street. There was a neighborhood babysitter who took care of my younger sister when she was too young to go to school. She also happened to babysit me on multiple occasions. She was always kind of rude, a pudgy lady with 2 annoying sons and a very weird husband. A lot of kids got taken care of by her, so my parents trusted her to take care of us. Everything was somewhat normal, except for the fact that she was kind of rude to anybody that wasn't her kid. Her kids were pretty misbehaved. They were always fighting, hitting each other with plastic swords, and screaming at the top of their lungs. At one point, the younger toddlers had a nap, and she forced all the children to sit in a corner and be quiet, besides her kids. Odd behavior for a babysitter, but we never thought much about it. Another thing to mention is that she took naps while babysitting, as in she didn't pay attention to the kids, she just shooed them away and fell asleep. She was also notorious for giving her sons chocolate milk and telling the others they had to have water. My sister and I tried to ignore it, but eventually we were kind of annoyed. My sister had a loud mouth, so she told my mom about how she treats the kids she babysits versus her own children. I'd also like to acknowledge that my sister had just turned 4, so she wasn't great with words. My mom was angry that the babysitter did that, but let it slide. As we were moving in a month, and she didn't know if we were being completely honest. The house we moved to is the house I spent a large majority of my childhood and teen years in. Things were normal once we transitioned into the new house, until we got the calls. We changed our phone numbers, so we weren't sure how the babysitter and her husband found it so quickly. She called every day, saying that we needed to pay her and that we owed her money. She was just angry that we had moved and were currently on the lookout for a babysitter that was closer to home. My parents received these calls every day, and they consisted of the babysitter or her husband screaming, which meant that I could hear the voicemails and calls quite clearly. They kept harassing us, and my parents grew agitated and worried. It all ended one night around 10 p.m. when my sister and I woke up to the sound of banging on the front door. It continued for a good 10 minutes, and it was very loud. My sister was freaked out, so I decided to go see if my parents were awake. They were. They were just opening their eyes, kind of confused as to what was going on. My dad told my mom to stay upstairs, and he foolishly went downstairs to get the door, as I stood at the railing nervously. My sister stayed in the bedroom because she was unaware as to what was actually happening. When he opened the door, I felt sick and terrified. There was my babysitter and her husband, who managed to not only find our address but also our phone number. The husband started screaming at the top of his lungs, yelling, "You owe us money! Pay us!" and shaking a knife. Yes, he had a knife in his hand. My dad told him that we didn't, and warned him to leave unless he wanted the cops to be called. He didn't care. My dad went to close the door, but he stuck his foot in it, attempting to get inside. My babysitter was also yelling, but I couldn't hear what she had said. We had a phone upstairs, so my mother quietly called the cops as my dad struggled to get the door closed. Once he did, the banging and screaming continued. They wouldn't leave our property. I was freaked out, so I started crying. My sister saw me crying, and she did the same. Long story short, about an hour after they left, the cops arrived, having just missed them. My parents knew their info based on the fact that they babysat us, so it wasn't hard to track them, and they were arrested. I always wondered if their children were home alone or at a sleepover, especially at a time so late. Regardless, they were released a few days later, but were not allowed to step foot near our house. I'm not sure if the woman still babysits, but if she does, I feel terrible for the kids. We never really knew what their intentions were that night. My dad saw the knife and knew that they were up to no good. All I can say is psychotic babysitter and her husband. Let's not meet ever again. 3. I suddenly remembered this strange and creepy occurrence from back when I was in high school, about 5 years ago, living in a small home with just my mom and some kitty cats. We lived in a really small town where everyone knows everyone. Population less than 3,000. Farming community, conservative, dull. We never had any issues of any kind really before, and our town has not had a murder in over 60 years. Even then, the last one was a jealous ex-lover, so there was no reason for us to really worry about crime. We left doors unlocked, windows open most of the time. At night, my mom religiously locked the doors and shut the windows, most of the time. All in all, we lived in a safe community. But it was pretty rural, so the houses were rather far apart and there were almost no city lights to keep things illuminated in the middle of the night. About 2 weeks before the major incident of this story, my mom was walking home from work at the middle school about 1.5 miles away when she noticed an unmarked white van with tinted windows parked on the end of the street ahead of her. She thought it was odd for a work-type van to have tinted windows, so she noted that it was a bit suspicious but continued her walk home. She passed the van and heard it start up when she walked by. As she turned the corner, the van pulled away from the curb and slowly followed. This obviously freaked her the hell out, so she called me. High school gets out an hour before the middle school, so I was already home. She told me she thought she was being followed, and that she'd been taking a longer walk home to test how long this van would hang around. After about 20 minutes, she walked in the door and locked it behind her. She said she stopped at the end of the driveway to stare this van down as it drove past our house, and she flipped it off. She's pretty fearless when it comes to confrontation, but she later explained she was scared because she didn't want them to come to our home and put me in danger. Anyway, when she flipped him off, the van sped away and careened around a corner, disappearing from sight. It was pretty creepy for the next few days, and I asked her to drive to work for the rest of the week. She loved being outside, and the weather was starting to get nice. She elected to walk to and from work, and she agreed. The next few days passed without issue. Fast forward to the incident in question. It was about 5 a.m. on a school day, and my mom was just waking up for work per her routine to make some coffee and get in the shower. Our kitchen sink is right in front of a window, and our house is all one story. At 5 a.m. it's still dark outside, so she flips on the light over the sink to fill the coffee pot with water, when she noticed that the cat was sitting on the counter staring, fixated on something outside. The window was closed and the light was casting a glare, so she couldn't see outside. She flipped off the light and leaned closer to the window to have a peek into the yard, and her scream from the kitchen woke me up from a dead sleep real damn quick. There was a man with his face about 4 inches from the window, standing in the flower garden just below the window. He was wearing a black hoodie and a bandana tied around his face so she couldn't see his facial features. Now this is where things get crazy. Her scream woke me up and I shot out of bed and ran to the kitchen. Then she yelled, "What the fuck?" and ran to the front door and opened it and literally ran outside. Ridiculous, I know. But she grew up in Flint, Michigan, known for crime. She didn't take any shit. I was honestly scared shitless at this point, having been woken from a dead sleep to learn there was a damn window peeper spying on my mom. I was stunned when she ran to the door. I instinctively grabbed a knife off the magnetic knife block thing hanging next to the sink, and I later saw that she had grabbed one as well. I ran to the front door to see her standing on the steps. There wasn't a porch, just steps, in her pajamas and slippers, with a knife in her hand. It was such an interesting and weird thing to see at 5 in the morning. At this point, she is screaming all sorts of obscenities at this guy, who has come to the front of the house, since the back where the kitchen window was had a fence on one side, so he had no choice but to run around the front to where my mother was now cursing him to high heaven. He must have tripped or something, because when I appeared behind her in the doorway, he was getting up off the ground before running down the street. As he ran, I followed him with my eyes, trying to make out his shape in the darkness. Parked just outside of the glow of the only streetlight around was the white van. It was dark, so I couldn't quite tell if it was the one with the tinted windows. But I hadn't seen another creepy van like that in town, so I am pretty sure it was the same one. I don't think I have ever seen my mom so furious as she was on that day. She called the cops and explained everything, and I got in the shower and the shock of it all finally hit me. I cried a little bit, but my mom knocked and said the cops needed to get a witness statement from me. So I hurried up and got dressed. After they left, I went to school and told all my friends and even my teachers about what happened. They were all pretty shocked, and swore they'd keep an eye for the creepy white van with the tinted windows. We never found out who it was, and we never saw the van again. Since then, I make sure to put all the shades down when I go to bed, so no one can see out or in. Creepy stalker van guy. Let's not meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 288. Well, we'll be at episode 300 pretty soon. Just be a couple of months away, so I'll put the weekly reminder. If you have any questions you'd like for the Q&A, I'm going to tag on to the end of it. Just pop them in the description of any video, or you can put them on Twitter or email them to me if you prefer. Although do bear in mind, if you want to be anonymous, let me know, and send it through an email and let me know. But I usually like to screen cap the questions and put them up, so it's up to you. I had quite an interesting weekend here myself, quite a relaxing weekend actually. I was going to make chicken and white wine sauce, but I got distracted with my Vive. I've just been playing things, trying new games, a lot of like free indie games and things like that, trying them out. I tried, was it Lightblade? Which is so definitely not a lightsaber Star Wars game. No siree, no it isn't. That was fun, pretty basic, but still quite fun. And I've also been trying to figure out how to view 3D models. Right, you know, kind of like you'd go to a Workswork museum and you'd be able to view them there. Well, there's some really cool ones of fictional characters in that you can get. And you can go to Sketchfab, and you can actually link that up to your browser, and you can view them through your headset. I think you can do it through like Google Cardboard and things like that as well. So I've been doing that, and there's some really good ones on there. But I found some really interesting ones I would like to view in VR, because it's fun to be able to walk around them. But the format's a bit difficult, so I've been trying to convert them and get them working. And that's proving quite difficult because while I can actually get them converted, I can get them converted to a format I can actually upload to Sketchfab, but I didn't create them. They're not my images, so I can't really do that. But, and you need to pay for an account if you want private uploads. And so I thought, well, I'll try Unity because they have a function for making VR games. You can import assets and all that, and then hit the VR function to preview them, see how things look. And I've got the problem of where I'm able to load the models, kinda, but there's no textures on it, so they're basically just like a stone statue or a marble statue. And I just can't figure out how to get the damn thing to apply the textures without having to do it manually for every texture. Or find another decent model viewer that someone else has already made. At least one that isn't kind of dodgy, if you know what I mean. So that's my current little project, trying to figure out how to do that. I've watched plenty of tutorials online, and none of them really make sense, to be honest with you, to me. I follow the instructions, and I can't find anything specific for the format I'm trying to use, but well, I'll keep plugging away at it, a little bit at a time, and I'll eventually work it out. Anyway, with that, I think I'll head off for now. Stop chewing your ears. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.